He's the chairman of Ankur Scientific Energy Technologies Private Limited, which focuses on renewable biomass gasification technologies. He serves on several committees and national panels dealing with energy and development. He has several degrees from MIT. Let me welcome Mr. Jain.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am grateful to Stanford University and Reliance for having this opportunity to talk to all of you. It has also given me an opportunity to listen to some of the most stimulating speeches and ideas from Dr. Mashelkar, Dr. Ramanathan, Mr. Sapre, and I'm sure there is so much more to come over the next few days. The focus of what I'm going to talk to you about is basically rural areas of developing countries and the role that biomass can play, a resource that to my mind has not received as much attention or as much technology development in spite of the potential that that particular resource has for developing countries in particular. Many of the things that I'll initially say are well known to all of you. Focus rural areas because a majority of the population that we are talking about, whether it is in India or any other developing country, which does not have access, is in these areas. Commercial fossil fuels have had very limited access so far. Utility grids, like we have seen, extensions have taken place. As Nikhil Wood has told you, there have been major initiatives on grid extension, but the fact of life is that grid extensions have not helped because there is no power. There are viability issues, all kinds of issues are there. So even if grids have been extended, the quality and availability of power has been very poor, which has essentially prevented most people from making any productive use of the grid extension. And above all, the fact that there is a very limited purchasing power with most of these potential customers or users. That has to be taken into account. The major needs of rural areas, as we all know, cooking happens to be the single most important need. Lighting, entertainment, communication, amenities that we talk about. Productive applications in agriculture, maybe cottage industry, commerce, etc. are the other needs that we need to look at. I'm focusing on biomass because to my mind, hydro, wind, solar, out of the various renewables, have had, I think, a reasonable development and major initiatives are being taken by a number of people. Nikhil is an example, Selco is an example, lots of examples there where a lot of initiative has gone in these three areas. There are, of course, issues of variations, diurnal, seasonal variations, whether you take hydro, whether you take wind, whether you take solar. Major focus of all of these technologies that have been extended to rural areas has been on lighting and associated activities. Lighting could extend to communication, entertainment, but not much beyond that. The key energy need of cooking is obviously, to my mind, not addressed by any of these renewables in any meaningful manner. And the final thing is that, of course, the resource is free in all three cases, whether you take sun, whether you take wind, whether you take water. The resource is typically free, but the fact is that at times there are capital investments which have to be paid for, and what that means is that you essentially take capital out of the rural areas. And that is one of the considerations that probably needs to come in at some point in time, saying that if you have people with limited purchasing power, should the money that is spent on these services remain in the village? Is there a way that it could remain in the village or the community, or does it need to go out? For example, if we have very large solar installations coming in this country under the National Solar Mission, the fact of life is that a lot of the money, we can say that we are using solar energy, we are going renewable, but the fact is that that capital essentially is being paid for and it is going out of the economy in most instances. To my mind, biomass could be a major game changer because it has all the right attributes that are required for this large population in rural areas. It's a local sustainable resource. So the issues about how the resource comes in, whether it will be the perennial or not, are not really very relevant. It's relatively widely available, relatively easy to store, which is a big advantage because that allows you to use it or convert it to any other form as and when you want it. You could do it round the clock. And there's a lot of potential for economic development in the local areas. Obviously, if you have all the right attributes and not much is happening, there has to be something wrong, because it cannot be that you have all the right attributes and still nothing much is happening. There are major drawbacks. Typically, biomass is still being used in a traditional manner. There are utilization efficiencies which are very, very low. There are serious, like we have heard from previous speakers, there are serious environmental indoor pollution issues that are there. And I think one of the major reasons for all of them is that very little technology has gone in so far. I mean, there have been initiatives on cooking stoves, there have been other initiatives, very well-meaning and very focused initiatives. But in terms of the larger picture, if you look at the technology going in, that has not happened. On the scale that it has happened with solar, it has happened with wind, it has of course happened with hydro, and part of the reason is that technology development is probably focused on business potential, what comes out in terms of what you produce or develop as a technology. And I think what we have been discussing this morning is how do you either change the business models or how do you look at the problem in a somewhat different manner. Now look at electricity in a country like India. You could have individual households, India or any other developing country, where probably the best answer to my mind is PV, because most other technologies will probably not make sense if you have a few houses on a hilltop or houses which are hundreds of meters apart, then obviously that probably will be the best answer. You could have small loads. It could be a community. I mean, it could be a village where you have a certain requirement for a standalone system. You could have mini grids that we have talked about based on solar, but they could also be based on biomass with much greater impact. And areas where we already have grid extended, and in this country we had a major program a few years ago called Rajiv Gandhi Gramin Vidyutikaran Yojana, where the country spent a large amount of money in extending the grids, in setting up distribution outlets, with relatively little impact to my mind. Lots of business, but not much in terms of what the impact on rural areas has been. The other thing that I said, handling cooking needs along with power. There are possibilities in terms of cogeneration where you say take biomass and can you do both? Give a good cooking fuel which takes away most of the issues that biomass has and also provide electricity at the same time. If you do that, then you tackle most of the rural area problems. What I'll just describe are a few initiatives, technological interventions that have essentially happened, which may make some sense. They are not at a scale today where one could call them disruptive, innovations, where one could say that they could be afforded by everybody, but I think it's moving in that direction. Like I said, if you have individual households, probably the sensible thing is to go with PV. If you have small loads, then like my friend Nikhil said, when you want to handle lighting, it's a small load. If you want to handle, entertainment, communication, again, the requirements are small. But if you decide to look at irrigation, if you decide to look at cottage industry, then many of the models that we currently have with solar probably become more difficult to implement. And that is the kind of place where probably biomass can come in. Now, what are these small power packs that we are talking about in terms of technology? You basically take locally available biomass and you have a technology that converts that to electricity, basically biomass gasification. Power can be generated at less than 4 rupees per unit of electricity. It's self-starting with no external power, startup power required. It takes you less than 10 minutes to start the system. It could be operated round the clock or as needed on demand. And biomass consumption is relatively very reasonable, about 1.3 kilograms per unit of electrical output. 10 kilowatts onwards, even smaller than that could be done, but 10 kilowatt onwards, there are systems which are already available and which are being used. And there are installations in this country, there are installations that are going out of this country in many other countries. And like I said, there is a tremendous potential for income generation. And one of the major initiatives for these small, systems that is coming in India in particular, is we have mobile towers. Now, mobile technology has moved in every nook and corner. Lots of potential for all kinds of economic interactions by even villagers. But most of the towers that are going in rural areas now essentially have to operate on diesel for the very simple reason that we have heard again and again that the power there is a real problem. Now, mobile towers are today becoming one of the major consumers of diesel in this country, one of the major consumers. And so there is a major push from government and policymakers to say that you have to reduce your fossil or diesel footprint. And the charter is that about 200,000 towers by 2015 must change over to renewables or a hybrid. Now, quite a bit of action has gone in solar, but there are limitations that I don't think we can discuss here. So the next major initiative is basically based on biomass. And the advantage, if you move into mobile towers, is that you could probably go from there to the community also. So if you have a small 10, 20 kilowatt system which is supplying power to a mobile tower, then you have one assured customer where you can essentially be assured of a certain revenue and certain viability. And then beyond that, you could start doing things with the local village. A typical small system, this is quite old. Now the new systems look far more compact and sophisticated. It's basically a small, and with mobile tower application, Reliance is a major player in mobile towers. The requirements are very, very different. You want a system, when we were working on this technology, we were given a charter that you have to have a system which must be totally remotely controlled. So you could have thousands of these installations which are controlled from a central location. You should be able to start the system, you should be able to stop the system, and you should also be able to monitor all the parameters of the system. Now, that's where the technology has come in now. The only unfortunate thing that requires presence at site is, of course, biomass charging, because you cannot do anything about biomass charging in a remote manner. So there must be somebody who will come every 10, 12 hours and charge the biomass. Other than that, everything is at a level where, so basically what I'm saying is you could go to any level of sophistication with the technology the way it is now. Then the other thing that I talked about in terms of saying that if you have basically grid extensions, and those grid extensions are not serving their purpose in terms of, every country, every developing country, India is no exception. Politicians, bureaucrats, all of us like to talk about the fact that finally our target group is rural population. We must provide them all basic amenities. We must provide them with good quality power. But I think the fact is, when you say power, we talk about power that is electricity. You could talk about power that is money power. You could talk about power that is power of being occupying a chair. And as would happen, power that is electricity always flows to those who have other kinds of power. So if you have money, if you have voice, if you have, political power, then you have a chance of getting good quality electricity. But if you look at rural population where most of these attributes are missing, then that is exactly why they are not given the priority. And many times when you talk about the fact, how can you ensure that the quality of power available in rural areas could be very good? One simple answer would be that if you could change your way of handling these things, what do we do? When we have a shortage of power, the first areas to be bumped off are rural areas. The last area probably to be bumped off in Maharashtra will be Mantralaya. Simply because most powerful people live there, you can't afford to cut them off. Now, if you were to simply say, I'll change my policy. If there is a power shortage, I'll cut off Mantralaya first. And the last people to be cut off will be rural areas. Then rural area power problem will get resolved. But the fact of life is that will never happen. So you have got to come up with initiatives which will ensure that there is a vested interest of urban, industrial powers to ensure that the rural areas will remain essentially connected. And one of the possibilities is that you have tail-end power plants, saying that most of the power, flowing to rural areas will be through about 1.52 MVA lines. Now that happens to be an ideal scale to set up a power plant at the tail end. And what you essentially end up doing is that by setting up a power plant there, where the need of the rural area is limited and variable, you have some power being generated in those areas that could flow back into urban or industrial areas. Now, if they become net producers, and I'm not going through the details so that I keep to my time. If they become net producers rather than net consumers of electricity, then immediately there is no reason for anyone to cut them off. Because if I am sitting in Bombay and if I have 100 feeders, which each one of them could bring in a megawatt of power into Mumbai, then there is no reason why I would cut them off. And all other advantages of biomass that we have talked about essentially become valid if you look at the investments that go into rural areas, if you look at the employment that could be generated. All of that essentially could come about by a simple change in the mechanics or the policies. Now, what prevents that from happening? If you look at the investments to my mind are not a problem. Because what we find is that in rural areas today, in rural India, there are a large number of people with quite a bit of money. And how has that money come about? We look at, all of us are familiar with the Nano story, right? Nano was shifted from West Bengal to Gujarat, to Sanand. And immediately the land prices there skyrocketed. So a farmer who had a couple of bighas of land essentially ended up with 1 crore, 2 crore, 3 crore, 5 crore, 10 crore kind of money. The farmer does not know what to do with that money. So as a matter of fact, if you look at the automobile majors and if you ask them, who's buying a lot of Mercedes, BMWs, this, that, then they'll say a lot of them were farmers some time back who have sold their land and who now have a lot of money. Now, all of these people are familiar with biomass. They are in rural areas and they have the money to invest whatever you need in terms of promoters' contribution. So it's not necessary that government has to put in money or big business has to put in money. But that could be essentially a paradigm shift in terms of what one wants to do for the rural populations. I'll just go through it quickly so that this is a plant that was set up in Gujarat. This is at 1.2 megawatt level at the tail end, just to prove the point that it can be done. Now, many more such projects are coming up, not in India, because there are some policy implications, but in other countries. You could look at islands, you could look at, we are doing a number of projects in Sri Lanka where policies are far more favorable. But basically, this is the kind of thing that one can do. And the last thing that I would talk about is co-generation of charcoal and electricity. Like I said, cooking is an important need. And to my mind, if you want to handle cooking and electricity through biomass, there are two mechanisms. One is when you generate gas from biomass through biomass gasification, you have the possibility of essentially piping the gas. You have to do it in a safe manner, but then Mumbai had producer gas before if you look at a century earlier, then they had producer gas in households and it was used for cooking and all. So it can be done in a safe manner. So if you generate gas, you could use that for cooking and you could also use that for power generation. The other option is you generate charcoal and electricity simultaneously, taking the biomass that the village is currently using today. And then you essentially have charcoal as a very clean fuel which goes to the households for cooking and electricity goes for all other applications. Charcoal yield of over 30%. Now 30% charcoal yield basically means that you are talking about something like 65% of the energy being in charcoal, which even charcoal conversion technologies today cannot claim. Where your only objective is getting charcoal out of biomass, even then you are limited to about 25-30% as the yield by weight. Now here you are able to generate power from the waste gases which would otherwise go into the environment, and you are able to essentially get this high yield. So basically, interventions like these could take you to a point where you say that, and this is just the kind of charcoal that is produced, just for quick look. So if we talk about game-changing technologies, I mean, there could be game-changing technologies, there could be game-changing policy initiatives, and which essentially could address the basic issues that we are talking about. To my mind, market-oriented technology development will only work to a limited manner, because unless you have, very disruptive technologies where you say you'll bring down the costs and affordability to a level which is not ruled out, but which seems difficult right now, where you could say that every poor household or every poor village can essentially have affordability. There, essentially, the business model in terms of saying that market will take care of things is unlikely to work. Now, what is it that we need to do with biomass? And that, I think, is a big challenge, whether it is people from Stanford or Reliance or people like us or whatever. To my mind, there are 2 or 3 things that need to be done. Can you take biomass and essentially figure out a way of converting into a standardized fuel? Because that is one of the big problems with biomass. Now, it is being done in different parts of the world in a different manner for a different reason. If you look at Europe, Europe is today using a very large quantity of pellets as a home heating fuel because, this is a standardized fuel. Now, if something like that at a village level could be done, then that would take care of one of the big issues with biomass, which is saying tremendous variation between the types of biomass, which makes it very difficult for any device to work effectively when you change from one fuel to the other, which is bound to take place if you are in an agricultural economy where you are going to have 2 or 3 crops, different residues coming in, and different times of the year, you'll have different biomass feedstocks to work with. So that is, I think, one challenge that one needs to meet on the basis of saying, can a technology development take care of the fact that like pellets are being made in a commercial manner for developed world or even in India, it could be done at village level in an affordable manner. The second, the fact that you have pellets and Europe is using them extensively has automatically led to a large number of home heating devices which are absolutely state of art and very affordable because the fuel is standardized. You are going to use pellets, so then you need to design a home heating system or a burner or a combustion system which will work with pellets. So that would be the second thing with the standardized fuel. Can you do that? Then the cooking part can be probably changed over effectively. And finally saying that whatever I have shown here in terms of the technologies or the hardware which essentially could lead to cogeneration, can that be essentially developed to an extent where it becomes absolutely state of art and more affordable? I think in a nutshell, that is what I wanted to present because I believe biomass is a resource whose time probably is now going to come. We have seen in some ways we can say in this country we started in a big way with wind. Then solar in the last few years has been a big story, and hopefully all over the world biomass will be the next major initiative. Thank you very much.
Jain? Well, it sounds like everybody must be hungry. Oh, there's one question right there.
Yeah. I'm so excited to hear what you're saying. If only we can convert the biomass to useful energy, we would have solved all of the problems I raised about health effects, agricultural effects, and climate effects. So this would be an exciting way to go, not only for India, but the rest of the world, because in the US, crop burning is one of the major sources of air pollution.
I believe that, I'm glad that you feel the same way. The point is that for various reasons, biomass has not received the kind of attention from technology developers that it should have. Maybe it will now. See, initiatives have to come from both sides in terms of potential business that one could make out of biomass conversion, biomass utilization, and also the kinds of initiatives that we are talking about here, saying that we recognize that business as usual is not going to solve all the problems. So if you change your focus, if you change your orientation, then probably more of it will start to happen. The point is that one has to, at times I strongly feel that the glamour is missing from biomass. That is one big problem. If you look at biomass, if you look at biogas, then the glamour of having a wind turbine whirring away, or the glamour of having photovoltaic cells on your house top or whatever is not there. And most of the policy decisions, most of the business initiatives come from people who are far removed from biomass. So, it's something that we say it is for the rural population, for villages, and it is somehow disconnected from us, so we are not able to take the kinds of initiative. But I think as more and more of us realize that in an interconnected world, if you don't solve problems of a large fraction of population, then you are creating big problems for the smaller population which is enjoying the benefits, whatever benefits we talk about.
Because if you look at
Could you repeat your question?
Yeah, no, that could be because of the availability of charcoal or bamboos, or maybe the structures. Because in India, if you look at most of the rural areas, the availability of charcoal is not so easy. Yeah.
There is a very simple reason for it. We have always been a society where the cooking in rural areas has been based on biomass directly. Agricultural residues, you have cotton stalk, you have whatever, or firewood, for example, which is collected as headloads from forest areas or picked up as twigs and branches by very poor people. There are other societies in the world which are developing societies, but where charcoal is the main fuel. Now, the point is that because biomass is available, unless we decide to convert it to charcoal, this ability to use charcoal will not be there. Because if you look at the charcoal availability or charcoal price, it's beyond affordability, or like you say, availability is very limited. So that is why, see, finally what happens is we have done a number of studies which say if you take a village and if you take whatever firewood they are using for cooking today and just put it through the technology route, which is saying simultaneous production of charcoal and power, then you not only meet all the cooking needs which were being met by firewood earlier, you save some resource and you also generate electricity. Now that is what we are talking. When Professor Mashelkar said that you want to have more from less for more, that is essentially what you are trying to say, that people are already using biomass. Can you essentially change the mode so that you use less of that resource and give a much bigger, much better output to the same people?
Yeah, actually, see, about 25 years back in my home, in our village, we had a biomass plant. There was only to charge the electricity for my home needs. That time we had a lot of cow dungs and charcoal available as structures, so we could be able to produce electricity only to cater my home needs. But if you look at today, it's not possible there because of availability of these structures.
This we can debate. My point is that you can take the same village which is using biomass, take only that resource because they are already using it. And only conversion technology takes it from 8 to 12% efficiency to something like 75 to 80% efficiency. And that is what allows you to do what you want to do.
Excuse me, sir. So the other thing that you missed out, I mean, because you were focusing only on gasification, the other is biogas itself, right? I mean, if you're talking about biomass, we have two kinds, dry and wet. And it's probably not only a rural solution, it's also a solution for cities. If you're talking about the wastage, waste to energy systems can be a solution across. I mean, it's not really, again, it's not a developing country solution either. So we need more efficient systems that are biomass based and that are compact.
You are absolutely right. I just focused on biomass because I was to focus on something, but you are absolutely right about biogas, its potential, not only in rural India, but also in urban India. I mean, for example, we are talking about Tamil Nadu now, where they are saying every hotel, every resort has to necessarily reprocess the food waste and produce biogas out of that. So all of that is absolutely very relevant. It is not, when I talk about biomass only, it is not to say that other things are not relevant. Obviously, every resource and every technology has the role to play, and I fully agree with what you have said about biogas.
There's one last question here.
Bani Banerjee from Stanford. This is a very exciting concept and an approach. Very impressed with your talk. I'm wondering if one should have a cautionary kind of a note in imagining a scenario where biofuels are really successful, and then one starts competing with food security and also regeneration of nutrients into the soil.
See, basically, if you look at biomass, then your focus has to be on two things. You cannot have a solution where you say you'll create other problems. That's very clear. So you essentially have to focus on agricultural residues, and you've got to focus on plantations which will go on barren land. Now, these are two initiatives which essentially ensure that you not only do not create additional problems, you essentially have an incentive or motivation to move the societies towards greater food security and also move them towards greater green cover. So basically what we are saying is that you are not going to use forest biomass or that kind of woody biomass to a large extent. But if you take agricultural residues, which are essentially in line with food security, the more you grow, the more food you grow, the more residues you'll have. That's number one. Number two, in India, we are now setting up projects where plantations are being put on barren land and then they are coupled to biomass production. So you increase the green cover. So basically, ideally, one would like to have solutions which are comprehensive, which essentially ensure that you do not, harm one part of the society by creating a benefit for the other part.
I have a last question, if you don't mind. Yeah. It's Jain this side.
Yes, please.
Yeah, hi. I fully agree that we should have more technology-intensive programs to enable use of biomass. But I think if you look at it from an industrial perspective, and if you're talking 1 megawatt, 2 megawatt of biomass plants, they are by and large even a lot to do with an industrial scale. We have technologies which can sustain and burn biomass very effectively to 80%, 85% efficiencies. In India, the biomass, surprisingly, though it's an agro-waste country, is about 30% or 40% more expensive per unit energy as compared to any part of the world. If you compare with Southeast Asia, if I have to compare palm kernel waste with a calorific value of about 6,000 kilocals, and the unit of 6,000 kilocals, I would typically, if I convert, I would get it at 2 rupees, 2.5 rupees. But I would get rice husk with 3,000 kilocals at 3.5 rupees. The main problem in India to use biomass is not really technology, it's actually establishing the supply chain to make it much more cheaper. So the supply chain and an organized supply chain to make biomass available is the key thing to address, and biomass would pick up as one of the source of energy.
See, I guess you had mentioned earlier, you are from Forbes Marshall. Yeah, you had said that industry is starting to use so much more firewood because of very high prices of fossil fuels over the last decade or so. Because industry wants to use it, the supply chain automatically gets established. If you look at rice husk, then the supply chain is reasonably well established because it comes from proper industrial activity. You have rice mills which produce rice husks so that you have that. Now, when you look at rural areas and if you look at the pricing and if you look at kilocalories, then to my mind, the whole, argument is in some ways, topsy-turvy. Because my simple argument is, what are we talking about? The point is that if you look at it from that perspective, then this whole conference or all initiatives like these are meaningless. Like Nikhil said, grid extension is absolutely non-viable, should not be done, cannot be sustained, whatever. So if you look at the population which cannot afford anything today, then only small initiatives which are sensible for them in a meaningful manner will probably be done. But the point is that the disconnect comes in because the person who is going to do the project, right, has to pay for the biomass. But a lot of the benefits, and one big thing that we must remember is that biomass is the only intervention where 80% of the total revenues that come from electricity generation or charcoal or whatever remain in that very society itself. So if you are based in a village, what happens if I set up a solar system, right? Then whatever I collect as tariffs essentially goes out of that system completely. Because somebody else has invested, he has to recover his investment, so money goes out of the economy. Now, when we set up this 1.2 megawatt power project in a tribal belt in Gujarat, in 1 year and 3 months, we bought biomass worth 4 crores. 4 crores, which was, half of it was being burnt in the fields. Because if you grow cotton, and if the rains come at a certain time, then you have very limited time and very limited utility for cotton stock. So what do? And this is the problem that you see with rice straw in Punjab, Haryana, right? When Delhi essentially has a big problem in summer, the reason is very simple. Farmers are burning their rice straw in the field because there's nothing much that they can do about it. So the disconnect is that the benefits, when we say that 4 crores went to that rural area, I don't get any credit for it. I must essentially pay for the biomass and still try and produce electricity, which is cost. That is where the policy shifts have to come, where you have to say that if you look at the comprehensive picture, then you have to say one part of the society is getting employment, it's getting a lot of additional income, right? there are lots of other benefits. How do I make it attractive for others who are entrepreneurs to come in and do that activity? That will not be on the basis of what direct revenues they could get. So policy has, see, look at the complete national solar mission. We started with something like 17, 18 rupees a unit, right? Why did we do that? We said a major expansion will take place, right? Which has taken place, right? So something similar, and I always say, if you can give 17, 18 rupees for power, which is not on demand, which is essentially beset with seasonal variations, daily variations, why can't you pay 7 rupees for biomass power, which is firm power, and where out of 7 rupees, 5 rupees are going to the rural population? That is simply because that rural population does not have the kind of voice that probably photovoltaic players had in this country 3 years ago. It's a fact of life. And that is where the problem is, that when you try and change a society, right, then these kinds of questions will always come about. And if we are able to take the right decision, then that's fine. Otherwise, the rural population has been living and they will live the way they have been living. I hope it answers your question partly. Yeah.
Give a big round of applause to
Thank you very much.